Hi, I'm Christian Kaiser Fox, the Urban Aboriginal Healthy Living Program Coordinator from the Nisqually Native Friendship Center. We have Alicia Topp from the Indigenous lead from Cancer Care Ontario here today to present Vaping 101.
Hi Christian, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thanks so much. So hi everyone. Like Christian said, my name is Alicia Topp. I'm with the Indigenous Tobacco Program. So I work in the Northeast, working in First Nations, Inuit and Métis communities. I also work in the Southeast too. So sometimes I get to pop down to the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte territory, but I currently live up in Sudbury. So like Christian said, we're going to just do a little chat today talking about Vaping 101. And what we know so far about the health impacts of it. So we'll dive in right away. What do we know about vaping and what do vapes look like? So vapes have been around for about 10 or 15 years now. They came out of China and they were originally created to help people quit smoking. And that's why they originally looked like cigarettes. Then they started to modify them and they became more of a larger system. People wanted bigger clouds of smoke when they exhaled. People wanted to get into novelty items, and that's where you see vapes that look like cigars and pipes. But currently, it's much more popular for vapes to look like what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. So they kind of look like USBs, and they're much more sleek designed. And part of that is because people now are just so used to having tech-like things. So we're comfortable with products that look that way. But then also it's because with youth that vape, it's easier to sneak it, especially in schools where we're seeing a lot of our youth are using vapes. So how do vapes work? They're battery operated and they heat a liquid that's called vape juice or e-juice, or sometimes it's just called a pod, but they all mean the same thing. And that liquid that is heated it's heated until it vaporizes. And then from there, it's turned into an aerosol. So even though vapes come in different shapes and sizes, and they've changed a bit since they first came on the market, they all have the same basic components. So there's a mouthpiece and there's that pod that holds the liquid. And then there's the heating element and the battery. So a lot of people think that vapes are safer. I'll get asked that a lot because I do help people quit smoking in my role. So people will say, well, are vapes safer, or even are they healthier than cigarettes? Because there's a misconception that when you vape, you're just breathing in a water vapor, but that's not actually the case. When you vape, you're actually inhaling aerosol. So the liquid in the vape is heated into an aerosol, and then the aerosol is inhaled into the lungs and it gets absorbed into the bloodstream. And then from there, the remaining aerosol is exhaled. And that's that cloud of smoke that you see that people exhale, much like cigarettes when they're vaping. So vaping is not a harmless water vapor. It is an aerosol. And because it's an aerosol, there's a mixture which contains many particles that get absorbed into our bloodstream. They move throughout our body and they even get into our brain. And then the remaining aerosol, like I said, is exhaled when people breathe out when they vape. So the concern is that when we heat up the liquid that's in the pod, that it can actually create more chemicals. So right now, we don't necessarily know exactly what chemicals are in those vape juices or those pods, but we do know that when we heat it up, it has the potential to create new chemicals. So for example, one of those chemicals that can be created when people vape is formaldehyde. And formaldehyde is actually used to preserve, it's a preservative, and it's used to preserve dead bodies. So, and that's actually found in cigarette smoke too. So that's just a strange byproduct that actually occurs when people vape in some of the vape juice. And there's also the possibility of contaminants. like metals getting into the vape products, and then therefore we're inhaling it when we vape. So what's the difference between water and aerosol? Because like I said, there's a misconception that vaping is just like vaping a water vapor, but it's not aerosol. So the picture on the left is Bridal Veil Falls on Manitoulin Island. And I like to use the idea of water. If you can think for a second, if you can imagine putting your hand under that waterfall, if you can imagine putting your hand in the water. We all know what water feels like. We know how it feels on our hands, and then it will roll off. But then imagine taking an aerosol can, so the WD-40, or a bottle of hairspray or sunblock. And if you were to spray that onto your hand, it leaves a residue, it leaves a stickiness, and that's what aerosol does. And that's what's happening to our lungs when we vape. So what's in an e-liquid, or that e-juice or the pods, and is it safe? So there's 4 main components to the e-juice. There's vegetable glycerin, propylene glycol, chemical flavorings, and nicotine. So vegetable glycerin, it's a sweet liquid. It's similar to a syrup. And in terms of vaping, it's used to actually help suspend the flavorings, those chemical flavors, and the nicotine in the vape juice. Now, vegetable glycerin is also found in some food, some makeup, and some prescription medication. And propylene glycol is a colorless and odorless liquid. It's found in industrial products like antifreeze and paint. And its main purpose in the vape is to produce that big puff of cloud when people exhale. Propylene glycol can also act as a food preservative or food thickener in packaged foods and in some fast foods. So both vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol are considered safe to ingest or safe to eat in small doses. But what's okay for your stomach is not necessarily okay for your lungs. So what we're finding now through tests is that when heated, vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol can create toxic chemicals that may cause serious health effects, including cancer. So we talked about flavors, and vapes are kind of known for their flavors, and it's sort of a selling point. And there are currently over 15,500 unregulated pod flavors on the market right now. So what does unregulated mean? Unregulated means that most of these flavors are not tested before they're put out for sale, and that there's no standard for checking them. So in other words, if somebody wants to go and buy a vape and buy the products and get some new pods or e-juice, there's no way of testing what ingredients have been put into it, how safe it is. We don't know if the equipment that was used to make it was sanitary and clean. We don't know what chemicals are being inhaled, either just what's in that product alone or once it's heated when people are vaping. And then also, they don't have to include an ingredient list. So we don't have to know what ingredients are on there. And even if those ingredients are listed, we don't know if they're actually accurate. So there's a lot of unknowns. So the danger is that people are vaping and putting things into their lungs, but we really don't know what's in it. So many of the pod flavors mimic candy and treats that you would find at any corner store. So with flavors like cotton candy and bubble gum and unicorn cakes, for example, it's really quite obvious to see that the industry, the vaping industry, is really targeting youth. And this is what cigarette companies used to do back in the day as well. They used to package things and advertise their products to make it appeal to a younger audience. And why would they do that? Why would cigarette companies do that when they could? And why are vaping companies doing that now? Well, the reason is because they need youth to buy their products because of the nicotine, which we'll talk about in a second, that's found in vapes. Young people can become addicted to these products very, very quickly. And then these companies have lifelong customers. So if they don't get kids addicted to these products, then they're out of business. So this is why you'll see a lot of vape products that are clearly targeted to getting young people to want to try them. So vape companies, like I said, they're doing the same thing that cigarette companies did to target youth. They're using packaging that looks really familiar to stuff we already have at home. You can see here that it looks like a can of pop. It looks like a juice box. It looks like maybe an ice cream carton or some popcorn. These all look safe. They look like things we're familiar with. And so it's really easy for young people, especially, to look at these products and think that they might not be dangerous, that there might not be a risk for them to use it. So let's take a look at some of the ways that different vaping companies use advertising to try to entice people, not just young people, but especially young people, to try their products. So this is an Instagram post from Blue, which is a vaping company. And here they're using Post Malone, who's really popular right now. And they've shown a picture of him vaping their products, and they've tagged him in it. This is an Instagram post from a site called Vape Porn, and they really like to sensationalize using vapes. And so here they are advertising what they're calling the world's finest ice cream flavors, and it even says, which flavor are you craving? So again, tying it into ice cream, to those flavors that are fun to eat. So therefore we can't help but think, well, wouldn't it be fun to vape it? And then this is a vape company called Vape. And what they wrote here is on the go at #London Fashion Week. And they're advertising their e-pen. And they have their e-pen on the ground with some makeup products. And so of course they're tying it into like, it's fun, it's glamorous, makeup is fun, fashion is fun, and so is our product. And also that reminds me actually that Juul, the Juul vaping company, that a lot of people are using the Juul products, that they spent millions of dollars a number of years ago in the States. And what they did was they paid to go into schools and to provide what they called as workshops. And what they did was they told the students and they told the school staff that vaping was totally safe. Those were their words, even though there's no proof that it's safe. So there's definitely a concerted effort on vape companies to go ahead and try to target youth as much as they can. So this photo here, what I like about this is that when you look at this picture, this just looks like the kind of school supplies that you would see in any kid's backpack or dumped in their room. And at first glance, for most of us, we look at it and we just see things that kids need to finish their homework. You might see some gum, but there's rulers and there's pens and there's markers and that kind of thing. But when we remove all of the actual school supplies, there's actually 14 vape products that were hidden in that photo, along with the regular school supplies. So this is a real challenge for adults. It's hard for parents and grandparents and guardians and aunties and uncles and everyone, all of us who look out for the kids in our family, because we might not recognize that a lot of these products, which are really hiding in plain sight, can actually be products that our kids are using and that they have the potential to become addicted to. So do you know what you're inhaling when you're vaping? And the answer is no. No one does, because it's unregulated. So remember that those new chemicals, they can be created when the pods are heated. So we're seeing microparticles and we're seeing metals that are actually in that aerosol that people are inhaling. Now, for example, some e-juice uses a sweetener, and when that sweetener is heated up, which happens when you use a vape, it heats up. When that particular sweetener is heated up, it creates a toxic furon, which actually can cause tumors. So it's actually quite dangerous how we don't know exactly what's in the vape and then what chemicals can be created when people do vape. So I thought we could maybe just take a second to look at some of the ingredients, the chemicals that are in a lot of the pods, in a lot of the e-juice. Some of them you might be familiar with and others might be something new, but it really puts into perspective that these are dangerous chemicals. They're not healthy. They're not of the earth. We certainly wouldn't necessarily want to ingest them by drinking or eating them. So vaping them and inhaling them into our lungs doesn't necessarily seem like a very healthy alternative either. So I mentioned propylene glycol before, and that it's found in antifreeze, artificial smoke. It's a food coloring, but it can cause irritation of the throat and the nose and the eyes. And it can be potentially toxic to the liver and kidney over long-term exposure. Benzene is found in explosives, gasoline, and pesticides, and it can cause neurological symptoms, including vomiting and dizziness and headaches, and it can cause excessive bleeding and immune system problems. Formaldehyde, I mentioned formaldehyde a bit as an embalming fluid used in preserving dead bodies, but it's also found in nail polish and foam insulation, which can also irritate the nose and the skin and the throat. And it's also been linked to an increased risk of certain types of cancer. Isoprene is found in rubber, so think your tires. And this substance is irritating to the eyes and the skin and the respiratory tract. And it's also possibly can cause cancer in humans. Toluene is paint thinner. It's found in glue. It's found in stain removers. And of course, it has a list of terrible potential health effects as well, like irritation of the eyes and nose, and long-term exposure may cause liver and kidney damage. Diacetyl it's found in microwave butter popcorn flavoring. And the reason that we learned about this was because there was actually a manufacturing company down in the States. They were creating these microwave popcorns, and a lot of their employees were becoming ill. And so they ended up finding out that it was because of the diacetyl. So diacetyl is often called popcorn lung, and diacetyl is also included in those e-juice pods. So long-term exposure has been associated with lung disease and other respiratory issues. Lead is found in bullets and weights, and that can create developmental and neurological effects. There's nickel that's also often found in it too, which can lead to chronic bronchitis and reduce lung function and even lung cancer. Cadmium, it looks pretty with all those bright colors because it's found in oil paints, but it's also found in car batteries, and it's also been linked to certain types of cancer. Acetone, a lot of people are familiar with acetone. They have it in their house, they've smelt it, it burns your eyes, it's a very strong smelling product. It's often in nail polish remover and degreaser because it can take off other chemicals. That's often found, that's found also in cigarettes, but also within vape pods too. And then lastly, there's phenol, which is sprayed as a disinfectant on crops. It's a herbicide, and it's been linked to heart disease and other skin irritations and stomach damage. So in other words, it's not just a water vapor. It has a potential, because the ingredients aren't listed and because it's not regulated and we don't know what anyone is vaping at any time, there's always the possibility that somebody could be vaping all of these products or some of these chemicals. So what is nicotine? We talked about the four main ingredients that are found in the e-juice that people vape. So there's propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, and there's those chemical flavors, but then there's also nicotine. So nicotine is found in commercial tobacco or cigarettes, and often found in vape juice as well. Nicotine is very addictive. It's a highly addictive drug. The more you use it, the more you need to have the same effect. It increases your heart rate and your blood pressure, and it can alter brain development, especially in young people as well. So vaping nicotine can alter teen brain development, which is quite alarming, really, when we think about that the pathways of our brain can actually be altered by nicotine. And that this is for a variety of reasons. And it's one, because the brain is not fully developed until about the age of 25. And nicotine can negatively affect memory and concentration and mood. And it can make it hard to learn, and it can make it hard to focus and even to be happy because it affects our mood. Nicotine can increase anxiety and stress, and it can alter the part of brain that deals with addiction. So it makes it easier, especially as a young person, to become dependent on it, maybe more than an adult would feel. So some pods contain more nicotine than a pack of cigarettes. Now, some vape pods will say that they don't have nicotine in them, but then when tested, we found that they actually do have nicotine. So you can't trust the label. So how do we measure nicotine in pods? When people smoke cigarettes, you can imagine like the length of a cigarette and how long it takes. And so you can kind of measure the amount of nicotine that's in a cigarette. But when you have a pod or when you have a vape, it's just a small little thing, and people tend to continuously vape. So what they found in terms of measuring is that one vape pod has about the equivalent of 20 cigarettes worth of nicotine in it. So one vape pod is about a pack of cigarettes. So that goes to show, of course, that if someone were vaping 4 pods, that would be about 80 cigarettes. So the nicotine levels are quite high. And they've also found, manufacturers have found a way to actually manipulate the nicotine in the vape juice, because what they found was that their users who were vaping, it would be very harsh on their throat, the level of nicotine. So they've chemically manipulated the nicotine so that when people vape, it's a smoother hit. And what this does is it allows them to have more nicotine faster, which gets people more addicted. But there's a risk of that nic sick, where people can become quite sick from the level of nicotine that's found in some of the vapes. And then remembering too that the more nicotine your body becomes used to, the more nicotine you need to feel normal. And that's where that addiction comes in. So youth who vape are 4 times more likely to start smoking cigarettes. And this is because of that nicotine addiction. It's that nicotine dependence. A lot of youth can sneak vaping because it's more likely in that USB or that very sleek design. It's really easy for a lot of youth to hide a vape in their sleeves or to just pull their shirt up and vape a bit. I mentioned that back in the day, a couple years ago, people were modifying their vapes to have the biggest cloud, but now the move has been to making it a little bit more discreet. And because it's more discreet, we see people are vaping in places that they normally wouldn't be allowed to, like washrooms at school, or if it's kids, they're even just vaping in their own bedrooms at home, and maybe their family doesn't even know. So the more people are able to sort of vape discreetly, the more there's a potential to become dependent on nicotine. And then it's likely that young people especially will start to smoke because they're accustomed to the nicotine, they're addicted to it, and nicotine or vaping and smoking are so similar. What I'd like to point out too is that from a harm reduction perspective, there's a lot of adults who vape, and they started vaping because they were smoking cigarettes and they wanted to quit smoking, and they used the vape to help them quit. And from a harm, like I said, from a harm reduction perspective, that might be quite helpful. We do know that there's less toxins found in vape as opposed to cigarettes. That's what we know so far. Because everything's been unregulated and because vaping is a relatively new product, there hasn't been a lot of tests. So we don't know the short-term effects and we don't know the long-term effects. We do know that now people who vape, we're seeing some asthma issues, we're seeing some bronchial conditions. We're concerned that some of the chemicals involved could lead to cancer. But for the adult who was smoking and wants to quit smoking and they've gone to vaping, that's a step in the right direction for sure. But if you're a young person and you don't smoke, there's no reason to start vaping. We actually say if you don't smoke, don't vape. So that's the end of the presentation. Quickly went through it, but I have a couple Jeopardy questions, Christian, if you feel like maybe playing along for a second.
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay. So there's just a few. Question number 1, how many different flavors of e-juice or pods are currently available?
I'm gonna guess 1,000.
So there's currently over 15,500 different flavors on the market right now.
Oh yes, that was earlier in the presentation. Yes.
Well, it's such a huge number. It almost doesn't seem right? Like 15,000 different flavors, but there's so many new companies. And a lot of them, if you see here, it says unicorn cakes. There's so many that are like unicorn, puke and unicorn, fruity pebbles. There's so many. Every like box of cereal or ice cream or milkshake or any kind of treat or dessert you've ever had is now a vape flavor. Question number 2, vapes and vapor products are currently unregulated in Canada. So what does unregulated mean?
It means you don't know what's in the product. And
exactly.
You don't test it.
There's no testing. We don't know what's in it. We don't know what the ingredient is. We don't know if it's been clean. We don't know if it's safe. It's just like the Wild Wild West. It's just like inhaling something and having it turn into an aerosol in your lungs, but you really don't know exactly what it is at all. Number 3, what is the vapor that is being drawn into the lungs and expelled into the air when vaping? It's not water.
Aerosol.
Yeah, it's aerosol, exactly. And again, it's like, imagine just putting your hand underwater and then imagine spraying WD-40 on it and the difference that would feel. I think I have 2 more, Christian. How much nicotine does a pod contain? Now that one's kind of up for debate, actually.
All of them are different, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. They're all different, so no one really knows. So Juul is a really popular company. They sell some pods at 3% and some at 5%, and 5% nicotine in a pod is about a pack of cigarettes. But some pods claim to have 0% nicotine, but when tested, they actually contain nicotine. So they're unregulated, so they can say whatever they want on the label. Last question. Vaping can have a more harmful effect on youth than on adults, and why would that be?
Because they could get addicted to it for life.
Exactly, because they can get, they're so it's so there is a word and I'm forgetting it, Christian, but they're more susceptible, that's the word. Youth are more susceptible to becoming addicted and addicted for life because their brain is still developing. And then nicotine can alter the pathways of the brain, making it easier for them to become addicted. So that's it for me. That's my email address, alicia.topp@ontariohealth.ca. Like I said, I work in the Indigenous tobacco program, so we help people quit smoking and provide information on vaping and cannabis too. I'd like to say miigwech. It was wonderful chatting with you, Christian.
Miigwech, thank you so much for the presentation. We really appreciate it, and I hope this presentation helps a lot of people.
Me too. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bamapi.
Bamapi.